He thought he was just doing a desperate favor for a friend, a heavily compensated blind date with a lonely, disabled woman who needed a night out. Liam, a struggling single dad, had no idea the woman in the wheelchair across the table was actually Genevieve Sinclair, a ruthless billionaire CEO. But the real shock wasn't her hidden corporate empire or the millions in her bank account. It was the devastating, heartbreaking secret she was hiding. A secret that would shatter Liam's entire world. The bitter wind of a Boston winter rattled the thin windows of Liam Sullivan's cramped apartment. But the sound that truly kept him awake was the soft, persistent coughing coming from the next room. Liam sat at the scratched kitchen table, staring blankly at a sprawling fan of final notices and medical bills. His 7-year-old daughter, Maya, had been in and out of the hospital for the past 6 months with a severe respiratory condition. The treatments were keeping her breathing, but they were simultaneously suffocating Liam under a mountain of debt. At 34, Liam was a man who had always prided himself on his work ethic. He had been a rising project manager at a mid-sized architectural firm until a massive corporate buyout had liquidated his entire department. Since then, he had been scraping by on freelance carpentry and generic contracting gigs, trying to keep a roof over Maya's head. But pride could not pay the $14,000 he owed to Boston General. His phone buzzed against the cheap laminate of the table, startling him. The caller ID flashed the name Bradley Cole. Bradley was an old college roommate who had abandoned their shared major in civil engineering to work in high-end lifestyle management, a fancy term for catering to the bizarre whims of the ultra-wealthy. "Liam, buddy, I need a massive favor, and you need a miracle." Bradley's voice boomed through the receiver, entirely too cheerful for a Tuesday evening. If this is another pitch to get me to install custom shelving for one of your tech bro clients at a discount, I'm going to hang up. Brad, Liam sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. No carpentry. I have a client, an extremely wealthy, highly guarded client, Bradley explained, his tone dropping to a hushed, conspiratorial level. Her family is paying my firm a premium to help her reintegrate into society. She was in a bad accident a few years ago, paralyzed from the waist down. She's isolated, cynical, and refuses to go out. The family wants to hire a companion, not a nurse. Liam, a date, someone to take her to dinner, treat her like a normal, beautiful woman, and remind her that the world hasn't ended. Liam felt a sour taste in his mouth. "You want me to be a gigolo? Are you out of your mind? It's strictly platonic," Bradley quickly countered. "Companionship. A chaperone who knows which fork to use. 3 dates. Liam. 3 dinners where you make polite conversation, treat her with respect, and show her a good time. The family is offering $10,000. Cash, half up front." Liam froze. $10,000. That was nearly the entirety of Maya's immediate medical debt. It was the difference between keeping their heat on through February and facing eviction. He looked toward the hallway, listening to another rough cough from his daughter's room. His pride felt heavy, but his desperation was heavier. 3 dates, Liam whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "And she doesn't know she's being managed. She thinks I just set her up on a blind date with a great guy I know. Just be yourself. Liam, she needs grounding, not some slick billionaire." 2 nights later, Liam found himself standing outside of the Luminary, an impossibly exclusive restaurant in the heart of the Back Bay. He tugged uncomfortably at the collar of his navy suit, the only one he owned, worn slightly thin at the elbows but freshly dry cleaned. He stepped inside, the ambient noise of clinking crystal and hushed, wealthy conversations washing over him. The maître d' guided him to a secluded, dimly lit alcove at the back of the dining room. Waiting for him was Genevieve. Bradley hadn't adequately prepared him. Genevieve Sinclair was not the fragile, timid shut-in Liam had pictured. She sat in a sleek, state-of-the-art carbon fiber wheelchair, but her posture was commanding. She wore a tailored emerald green blazer that brought out the startling ice blue of her eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. There was a sharp, almost intimidating aura about her. "You must be Liam," she said as he approached. Her voice was smooth, carrying a subtle, authoritative edge that caught him off guard. She didn't extend her hand. "Genevieve, it's a pleasure," Liam said, taking his seat. He consciously avoided glancing at the wheelchair, focusing entirely on her face. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Genevieve said, picking up her menu with a manicured hand. "Bradley likely told you I'm a socially anxious invalid who needs a pity date. I agreed to this because my brother wouldn't stop hovering, and frankly, it was the only way to get him out of my penthouse. So, Liam Sullivan, what's your angle? Are you hoping to marry into money? Or do you just enjoy the charity of entertaining a cripple?" The sheer bluntness of her words struck Liam like a physical blow. The wealthy people he occasionally did contracting work for usually hid their arrogance behind polite, passive-aggressive smiles. Genevieve was launching missiles across the table before they had even ordered water. A sudden spark of irritation ignited in Liam's chest. He thought of Maya's medical bills, of his own exhaustion, and the absolute absurdity of this wealthy woman sitting in a five-star restaurant acting like a victim of inconvenience. "Actually," Liam said, leaning forward and placing his forearms on the table, matching her intense gaze. "I was told you were lonely. But if you're just going to be miserable and insulting to a guy who put on his only clean suit to meet you, we can call it a night right now. I don't need your money, and I certainly don't have time for your pity party." Genevieve's eyes widened slightly. For a long, tense moment, the silence between them was deafening. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of her mouth twitched. A short, genuine laugh escaped her lips. "Well," Genevieve murmured, closing her menu, "that's the first time in 3 years someone hasn't spoken to me like I'm made of glass. Sit down. Liam, let's order." The tension that had threatened to suffocate their initial meeting dissolved into something surprisingly magnetic. For the next 2 hours, Liam found himself completely absorbed in the conversation. Genevieve was sharp-witted, fiercely intelligent, and possessed a dark, sarcastic sense of humor that Liam couldn't help but enjoy. Despite the transactional nature of the evening, Liam found himself speaking honestly. When Genevieve probed into his life, noticing the calluses on his hands, he didn't lie. He told her about his carpentry, the late nights, and eventually, he spoke about Maya. "She's 7, Liam said, a soft smile breaking through his normally guarded expression. He swirled the remaining ice in his glass. "She wants to be an astronaut, but only if they allow dogs in space. She's my entire world." Genevieve watched him closely, her icy blue eyes softening. "It must be difficult, doing it all on your own. Her mother passed away when Maya was a baby," Liam explained, the familiar ache settling in his chest. "Car accident. It's been just the two of us for a long time. It's hard, yes, but when she smiles, none of the hard stuff seems to matter." A shadow crossed Genevieve's face. She looked down at her own lap, her fingers lightly tracing the armrest of her wheelchair. "Car accidents have a way of drawing a definitive line through your life," she said quietly. "There is the before and the after, and the two people who exist in those timelines never get to meet." Liam realized, with a pang of genuine empathy, that she was referring to her own injury. He reached across the table, instinctively, and briefly touched her hand. "You're still here, Genevieve. The after isn't over yet." She looked at his hand, resting on hers. She didn't pull away, but he saw the walls immediately slide back up behind her eyes. The evening ended shortly after. Liam walked her to the curb where an imposing black town car was waiting. A massive, stoic driver emerged to assist her, but Genevieve waved him off, expertly maneuvering herself onto the hydraulic lift. "I'll see you on Thursday, Liam," she said before the tinted window rolled up. The next morning, Liam's bank account showed a direct deposit of $5,000 from Lumiere Concierge. He stared at the glowing numbers on his phone screen. He should have felt relief. This covered Maya's most urgent bills. Instead, he felt a sickening wave of guilt. Genevieve wasn't a project or a charity case. She was a deeply complex woman, and he was being paid to deceive her. By the time their second date arrived, Liam was determined to change the dynamic. Instead of another stuffy, Michelin-starred restaurant, he texted her an address in the North End. When Genevieve's town car pulled up, she looked out the window with clear skepticism. It was a bustling, chaotic street market, filled with the smells of roasted garlic, fresh pastries, and the loud, overlapping shouts of vendors. "You brought a wheelchair to a cobblestone street market?" Genevieve asked, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow as the driver lowered her onto the pavement. "I brought you to get the best cannoli in the state of Massachusetts," Liam corrected, smiling. "And if you get stuck, I'm pretty strong." For the first 30 minutes, Genevieve was incredibly tense. She hated crowds. She hated the way people looked at her. The quick, pitying glances before they averted their eyes. But Liam didn't hover. He walked beside her, seamlessly guiding the flow of foot traffic away from her without making a show of it. He bought her a messy, powdered sugar-covered pastry and made her eat it on a park bench watching street performers. "You're a very strange man, Liam Sullivan," Genevieve noted, wiping sugar from her lip. She looked relaxed. The severe knot in her hair had loosened, and the icy CEO exterior had completely melted away. "I'm just a guy who knows good pastries," Liam laughed. It was in that moment of levity that Liam noticed him. A man in a dark gray suit, standing by a street lamp about 50 yards away. The man had an earpiece and was staring directly at them. When Liam made eye contact, the man immediately turned toward a storefront, pretending to inspect the window. Liam frowned, glancing over his shoulder. On the other side of the square, another man in a similar suit was loitering near a vendor, his eyes entirely focused on Genevieve. "Genevieve," Liam said slowly. "Are those your security guys?" Genevieve stiffened. She didn't look back, but her jaw clenched. "My family insists on protection. It's complicated." Before Liam could press the issue, Genevieve's phone vibrated violently against the metal armrest of her chair. She looked at the screen, and the relaxed woman from a moment ago vanished instantly. Her face went deathly pale, then hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "Excuse me," she said to Liam, her voice suddenly dropping to a freezing temperature. She wheeled herself a few feet away, answering the call. Liam didn't mean to eavesdrop, but her voice carried a sharp, commanding whip that cut through the noise of the market. "I don't care what the board thinks. Richard," Genevieve snapped into the phone, her tone dripping with authority. "Liquidate the assets in the Chicago branch. If they push back, tell them I will personally dissolve their pensions. I am the CEO, and my decision is final. Handle it, or you're fired." She hung up, dropping the phone back into her purse, letting out a frustrated sigh before turning back to Liam with a forced, polite smile. "Sorry about that. Family drama. Liam stood frozen. CEO, liquidate assets. He remembered the logo he had briefly seen illuminated on her phone screen when it rang. A sleek, geometric S wrapped around a globe. His breath caught in his throat. It was the logo for Sinclair Dynamics. Sinclair Dynamics, the massive, ruthless private equity firm that had bought out Liam's architectural company 8 months ago. The firm that had ordered the immediate liquidation of his department, laid off 300 workers right before the holidays, and plunged Liam into the financial ruin that was currently threatening his daughter's life. The woman he was being paid to date wasn't just a lonely, wealthy heiress. Genevieve Sinclair was the architect of his destruction. The cobblestone street market around Liam seemed to blur into a dizzying swirl of noise and color. His heart hammered a violent rhythm against his ribs as he stared at the woman sitting in the wheelchair beside him. Genevieve Sinclair. The name echoed in his mind, a ghostly reminder of the worst day of his professional life. He remembered the sterile, windowless conference room at the architectural firm 8 months ago. He remembered the cold, corporate representative from Sinclair Dynamics, standing at the head of the table, handing out severance packages in manila envelopes while explaining that the department was being restructured for optimal shareholder value. That restructuring had cost Liam his career, his health insurance, and his ability to pay for Maya's mounting medical care. And the architect of that misery, the ruthless CEO who had signed off on the mass termination, was sitting right in front of him, dabbing powdered sugar from her lips with a napkin. Liam, Genevieve's voice pulled him back to the present. Her piercing blue eyes were studying his face with sudden concern. Went completely pale. Are you all right? I'm fine. Liam lied, his voice sounding entirely too hollow to his own ears. He swallowed hard, forcing the bile down his throat. Just a sudden headache. I think the crowd might be getting to me. Genevieve immediately looked guilty, a stark contrast to the cutthroat executive he had just heard over the phone. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have taken that call. We can leave. I'm quite tired anyway. The ride back to her penthouse was suffocatingly quiet. Liam stared out the tinted window of the town car, his mind racing through a maze of anger and desperation. He wanted to scream. He wanted to demand answers, to ask her if she knew how many families she had ruined with a single stroke of her pen. But then, an image of Maya's fragile, sleeping face flashed across his mind. He needed the remaining $5,000. If he blew his cover now, if he confronted her, the contract with Bradley's agency would be voided. He would be evicted. Maya would suffer. He was trapped when Liam finally returned to his cramped apartment. The silence was broken only by the steady hum of the old refrigerator and the terrifyingly familiar sound of Maya's dry, rattling cough. He walked into her bedroom. The small humidifier was working overtime, pumping cool mist into the air. Maya was asleep, her small chest rising and falling with visible effort. Liam sat on the edge of her bed, burying his face in his rough hands. The guilt of his deception was eating him alive, but the necessity of it was absolute. The next morning, Liam called Bradley. The lifestyle manager picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you're calling with good news," Bradley said. "Her brother called my office. He said Genevieve actually enjoyed the market yesterday. You're a miracle worker, Liam." "She's the CEO of Sinclair Dynamics." "Brad," Liam hissed into the receiver, pacing the length of his narrow kitchen. "Why didn't you tell me? You knew they bought out my firm. You knew they laid me off." There was a heavy, loaded silence on the other end of the line. "Liam, I didn't know the exact corporate structure of her portfolio. Sinclair Dynamics is a massive umbrella corporation. I just deal with the family's private trust. But even if I did know, what difference does it make? You need the money. She needs a tether to reality. It's one more date. The difference, Liam growled, gripping the edge of the counter, is that I am being paid to entertain the woman who destroyed my life. I feel like a massive hypocrite. You're a father trying to save his kid, Bradley corrected gently but firmly. Swallow your pride for one more night. Liam, the final $5,000 hits your account the second the third date is over. Don't sabotage your daughter's future over a bruised ego. Liam knew Bradley was right, but it didn't make the bitter pill any easier to swallow. Friday night arrived with a suffocating tension. For their third and final arranged date, Genevieve had requested something quiet. She had rented out a private viewing wing of the Boston Aquarium after hours. When Liam arrived, the massive cylindrical tanks were illuminated by ethereal blue lights, casting rippling shadows across the polished floors. Genevieve was waiting near the shark exhibit, looking breathtaking in a simple, elegant black dress. But as Liam approached, she immediately sensed the shift in his demeanor. The warm, engaging man from the street market was gone, replaced by a rigid, guarded stranger. "You're quiet tonight," Genevieve observed as they moved slowly through the glowing blue tunnel. Schools of silver fish darted above their heads. "Just a long week," Liam muttered, keeping his eyes on the glass. He kept a deliberate physical distance between them, terrified that if he got too close, his anger would boil over. Genevieve stopped her wheelchair. The electric hum of the motor died, leaving only the sound of bubbling water. "Liam, look at me." He reluctantly turned his gaze to her. "I spend my entire life surrounded by people who lie to me," Genevieve said, her voice echoing softly in the empty corridor. "People who manage me, people who fear me, and people who want something from me. You were the first person in years who treated me like a human being. But right now, you are looking at me like I am the enemy. What did I do?" Before Liam could form a response, before he could decide whether to unleash his fury or maintain the lie, his cell phone erupted with a shrill, jarring ringtone. He pulled it from his pocket. It was Mrs. Higgins, his elderly neighbor who watched Maya when he worked late. Liam answered immediately, his heart dropping into his stomach. "Liam." Mrs. Higgins's voice was panicky and breathless. "It's Maya." She stopped breathing. "The ambulance is here. We're going to Boston General. You need to come now." The phone slipped from Liam's trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the aquarium floor. The world went entirely black at the edges. "Maya." "Liam!" Genevieve wheeled forward, her blue eyes wide with alarm. "What is it?" "My daughter," Liam choked out, the anger vanishing, leaving only raw, primal terror. "I have to go to the hospital. I have to leave." He turned to run, but Genevieve grabbed his wrist with astonishing strength. "My driver is outside. We will get there faster than you can find a cab. Let's go." The emergency room at Boston General was a chaotic symphony of suffering. Fluorescent lights buzzed mercilessly overhead, illuminating the frantic movements of nurses and orderlies. Liam burst through the sliding double doors, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning the crowded triage area with frantic desperation. Genevieve was right beside him, her electric wheelchair humming quietly as she expertly navigated through the chaotic throng of patients. "Maya Sullivan!" Liam shouted at the front desk, his hand slamming down on the laminate counter. "A 7-year-old girl. She just came in by ambulance. Respiratory failure. Where is she?" The triage nurse, exhausted and overwhelmed, barely looked up from her computer screen. "Sir, you need to calm down and take a number. We have a massive pileup from a highway collision. She's likely in a holding bay waiting for a pediatric specialist to clear surgery." "Waiting!" Liam's voice cracked, a terrifying blend of panic and rage welling up inside him. "She can't breathe. You need to find her right now. Sir, if you don't lower your voice, I will have security remove you," the nurse replied coldly. Before Liam could explode, Genevieve moved forward. She didn't shout. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she radiated a quiet, terrifying authority that instantly commanded the space. "Nurse," Genevieve said, her tone as sharp and cold as freshly carved ice. "My name is Genevieve Sinclair. I am the primary benefactor of the Sinclair East Wing of this hospital. You have exactly 30 seconds to locate Dr. Aris Thorne, the head of pediatric pulmonology, and tell him to get his ass down to the ER for Maya Sullivan, or I will personally ensure this hospital's funding is severed by midnight. Find her, now." The nurse paled, her eyes darting from Genevieve's face to the expensive wheelchair, finally recognizing the billionaire heiress whose name was etched into the marble of the building's lobby. Within seconds, a frantic flurry of phone calls was made. Less than 2 minutes later, a team of specialists was rushing Liam down a sterile white corridor toward a private stabilization room. For the next 4 hours, Liam sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room, his head buried in his hands, trembling. He had never felt so entirely helpless. Genevieve remained with him. She sat quietly a few feet away, a silent sentinel in the sterile, depressing room. She had ordered her security team to bring them coffee, but neither had touched it. Finally, Dr. Thorne emerged from the double doors. He looked exhausted but offered a small, reassuring smile. "Mr. Sullivan? Maya is stabilized. It was a severe acute asthma exacerbation complicated by her underlying condition. We had to intubate her temporarily, but we've removed the tube. She's resting. She's going to be okay." A ragged sob tore from Liam's throat. He buried his face in his hands, the adrenaline completely draining from his body, leaving him a hollow shell. She's being moved to a private VIP suite. Dr. Thorne continued, glancing respectfully at Genevieve. "Ms. Sinclair has taken care of all the arrangements, including the specialist's fees and the private room. You can go see her in a few minutes." The doctor walked away, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in his wake. Liam slowly raised his head. He looked at Genevieve. The gratitude he felt for her intervention was immense, a towering wave of relief. But beneath it, the dark, ugly truth of their connection continued to fester. She had just saved his daughter's life, using the very wealth she had accumulated, by destroying his livelihood. "Thank you," Liam said, his voice hoarse. "I don't know how I will ever repay you for this." "You don't have to," Genevieve replied softly, her usual defensive armor stripped away. "I saw how much you love her. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing." Liam stood up, his legs shaking slightly. He paced the small waiting room, the internal pressure finally reaching a boiling point. He couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't pretend. "Why did you do it, Genevieve?" Liam asked, stopping to look at her. "Why do you play the benevolent savior here, when you are so willing to destroy people everywhere else?" Genevieve frowned, her wheelchair shifting slightly as she bristled at the accusation. "What are you talking about? I just helped your daughter. Liam, where is this coming from?" "Sinclair Dynamics!" Liam snapped, the anger finally bleeding into his voice. 8 months ago, you acquired the architectural firm I worked for. You ordered the liquidation of my entire department to boost your quarterly margins. 300 people lost their jobs right before Christmas. Genevieve, I lost my health insurance. The only reason Maya is relying on emergency room visits and a father who can barely afford groceries is because you fired me." Genevieve stared at him, completely stunned. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking as pale as she had been at the market. "You were at the Boston firm." "Yes," Liam laughed bitterly, running a hand through his messy hair. "And to make it worse, the only reason I met you is because your family paid Bradley Cole $10,000 to hire a fake date to babysit you. I was desperate, Genevieve. I took the money because I had to pay the medical bills that you caused." The silence that followed was absolute. The betrayal in Genevieve's eyes was devastating. She looked away, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the armrests of her chair. She had been bought, managed, and lied to by the one person she thought had seen her as human. "I didn't authorize the Boston liquidation," Genevieve whispered, her voice trembling with an emotion Liam couldn't quite place. It wasn't just anger, it was fear. Liam scoffed. "Your signature was on the documents. Because if I didn't sign them, they were going to kill me," Genevieve snapped, her head snapping up, her blue eyes blazing with tears and a fierce, heartbreaking defiance. Liam froze. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "Do you think my paralysis was an accident, Liam?" Genevieve demanded, her voice breaking as she gestured violently to her lifeless legs. "Do you think my car just happened to swerve off a bridge 3 years ago? It wasn't an accident. It was a message from my own board of directors. I am a prisoner in my own company, Liam. I sign what they tell me to sign. I liquidate what they tell me to liquidate. Because if I don't, they will finish the job they started." The sterile silence of the hospital waiting room felt heavier than concrete. Liam stared at Genevieve, his mind struggling to process the sheer gravity of what she had just said. The words echoed in his ears, a chilling counter-melody to the rhythmic hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. A message from my own board of directors. They will finish the job. The image of the ruthless, untouchable billionaire shattered entirely, leaving behind a terrified woman trapped in a nightmare. The ice in Genevieve's eyes had melted into a pool of raw, unvarnished fear. Her hands, usually so poised and deliberate, were trembling uncontrollably as they gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. "What are you saying?" Liam breathed, his voice barely a whisper, terrified that speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile truth hanging between them. Genevieve swallowed hard, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. 3 years ago, I started noticing massive discrepancies in the company's offshore accounts. Tens of millions of dollars were being siphoned into shell corporations. When I brought it to the board, my chief operating officer, Richard Montgomery, told me it was a tax strategy. I didn't believe him. I ordered an independent audit. She paused, a haunted, distant look crossing her face. She looked down at her paralyzed legs, a bitter smile twisting her lips. 2 days before the audit was supposed to begin, I was driving my sports car through the Berkshires, she continued, her voice trembling. The brakes failed entirely on a hairpin turn. The police report called it a catastrophic mechanical failure. I plummeted 40 feet into a ravine. I was in a coma for a month. When I woke up, I couldn't feel my legs. And sitting next to my hospital bed, holding a bouquet of flowers and a new stack of executive mandates, was Richard. Liam felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. He orchestrated the crash. And he made sure I knew it without ever saying the words, Genevieve whispered. He told me how fragile life was, how easily accidents happen. He informed me that the independent audit had been canceled during my coma, and that moving forward, the board would be making the stressful decisions to protect my health. If I signed where they told me to sign, I could live comfortably as the wealthy face of Sinclair Dynamics. If I fought them, well, he reminded me that I survived the first accident by a miracle, and miracles rarely happen twice. The pieces suddenly clicked into place in Liam's mind. He thought back to the men in the dark suits at the cobblestone street market, the way they hovered, the way Genevieve's posture had stiffened when she realized they were there. Your security detail, Liam realized, a wave of sickness washing over him. They aren't protecting you from the public. They are keeping you under surveillance. They are Richard's men, Genevieve confirmed, a tear finally escaping and tracing a shining path down her cheek. I am a prisoner in a very expensive cage, Liam. The reason I ordered the Chicago liquidation today. It wasn't to boost margins. It's because I'm secretly routing a percentage of those liquidated funds into a blind trust to hire a private investigative firm and build a federal case against Richard. I have to look like the greedy, ruthless CEO to keep him from realizing I'm building a guillotine for him. The layoffs at your firm. I am so sorry. Liam, I had to sign the paper, or I wouldn't have survived the week. Liam stumbled backward, sinking heavily into the cheap plastic chair. The fury that had been boiling inside him just moments ago vanished, replaced by a profound, suffocating horror. He had spent the last 8 months hating the name Genevieve Sinclair, blaming her for his financial ruin, for his daughter's precarious situation. He had taken the money from Bradley's agency, feeling morally superior, convinced he was scamming a spoiled, arrogant heiress. Instead, he had been judging a hostage. Genevieve. Liam dragged a trembling hand down his face, the weight of his own ignorance crushing him. I am so sorry. I judged you. I took that money because I was desperate, and I blamed you for everything. You had every right to, Genevieve said softly, wheeling her chair closer to him. She reached out, her cool fingers gently resting on his knee. You were protecting your daughter. I would have done the exact same thing. I'm not angry about the fake dates. Liam, honestly, you are the only person who hasn't looked at me with an agenda in 3 years. You're the only real thing I've experienced since the crash. Liam looked at her hand, resting on his knee, then up into her desperate, beautiful eyes. The transactional nature of their relationship evaporated entirely, burned away by the dangerous truth they now shared. How close are you to exposing them? Liam asked, his voice hardening with a sudden, protective resolve. Close, Genevieve whispered, glancing nervously at the hospital corridor doors. But Richard is getting suspicious. He knows I'm moving money. He doesn't know where it's going yet, but he's tightening the leash. I need physical evidence of the offshore accounts to give to the FBI. The digital files are heavily encrypted on an isolated server. It's kept at a secure off-site archive downtown. Liam's architectural mind immediately sparked to life. An off-site archive. Wait, did Sinclair Dynamics buy the old municipal telecom building on 4th Street last year? Genevieve looked surprised. Yes, how did you know? A slow, dangerous smile crept onto Liam's face. Because before you fired me, my department designed the HVAC and subfloor cable routing for that exact building. I know every air duct, every blind spot, and every security door in that facility. And I still have the blueprints in my apartment. The next 3 days passed in a tense, high-stakes blur. Maya was transferred out of the ICU and into the sprawling VIP recovery suite that Genevieve had secured. The color had finally returned to the little girl's cheeks, and the terrifying wheeze in her chest had vanished. Genevieve visited every afternoon. She brought Maya an incredibly rare vintage pop-up book about the Apollo space missions, complete with a dedicated page on the Russian space dogs. Maya was instantly captivated, completely unbothered by Genevieve's wheelchair, watching the ruthless billionaire patiently read to his daughter, doing silly voices for the astronauts. Liam felt something entirely unexpected bloom in his chest. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was a deep, undeniable affection. But outside the safety of the hospital walls, the danger was escalating. To maintain their cover and prevent Richard Montgomery from getting suspicious, Liam and Genevieve had to keep up the charade of their arranged romance. Bradley Cole was ecstatic, leaving Liam voicemails praising his magic touch and congratulating him on turning the Ice Queen into a romantic. Richard's surveillance team followed them everywhere, documenting their dinners and quiet walks through the park. They used this surveillance to their advantage. On a rainy Thursday evening, they executed their plan. Genevieve arranged for a highly publicized, romantic dinner at a private dining club located directly across the alleyway from the Sinclair off-site archive. The club was notoriously strict about security, forcing Richard's men to wait in their black SUVs on the street out front. Inside the dimly lit, velvet-lined private room, the romantic facade dropped the second the doors closed. "We have exactly 45 minutes before the waitstaff returns for the second course," Genevieve said, handing Liam a small black key card. "This is a master clone. It will get you through the lobby, but the server room itself has a biometric lock. You have to bypass it from the inside." Liam stripped off his suit jacket, revealing a tight black long-sleeve shirt underneath. He pulled a compact set of tools from his briefcase. "The HVAC vents in that building are industrial scale. I can access the secondary ventilation shaft from the alleyway roof, drop into the server room, and plug the extraction drive directly into the mainframe. I'll be back before the soup gets cold." Genevieve grabbed his hand before he could turn away. Her grip was tight, her eyes wide with genuine fear. "Liam, please. If you get caught, Richard won't fire you. He'll bury you. You don't have to do this. You have Maya." "I'm doing this for Maya," Liam said softly, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "And I'm doing it for you. You've been fighting them alone for 3 years. Genevieve, you aren't alone anymore." He slipped out the kitchen service door, diving into the freezing Boston rain. The alleyway was pitch black. Liam moved with the silent efficiency of a man who had spent his life navigating construction sites. He scaled the fire escape of the adjacent building, leaping across the narrow gap to the roof of the archive. The rain slicked the metal, but his grip held true, finding the massive industrial exhaust vent he had personally drafted the blueprints for. He popped the grate with a pry bar and slipped inside. The descent was claustrophobic and terrifying. The metal ducts echoed with the hum of the servers below. Liam counted the junctions in the dark, relying purely on memory. 2 lefts, 1 right, down the vertical drop. He kicked out the final grate and dropped silently into the server room. The space was bathed in the eerie blue glow of server racks. It was freezing, designed to keep the massive computers from overheating. He moved quickly to the central terminal. Genevieve had given him a flash drive programmed by her private investigators to bypass the firewall and siphon the offshore ledgers. Liam plugged it in. A progress bar illuminated the small screen. 10%. 30%. Liam paced nervously, his eyes darting to the heavy steel security door. Suddenly, a notification pinged on the terminal. It wasn't an encrypted offshore ledger. It was a hidden, internal executive memo, flagged with top-tier urgency, sent directly from Richard Montgomery's private terminal an hour ago. Curiosity overpowering his caution, Liam clicked the file. The screen populated with a digital document. Liam's blood ran entirely cold as he read the words. Subject: Project Conclusion, G. Sinclair. The subject's recent erratic financial movements indicate she is attempting to build a defense. The timeline is compromised. The asset must be liquidated permanently. Schedule the secondary accident for this Sunday during her transit to the gala. Ensure brake lines are severed completely this time. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. They were going to kill her in 3 days. But as his eyes scanned down to the bottom of the memo, a wave of sheer, paralyzing terror seized him. Addendum. The subject has recently formed an attachment to a civilian contractor, Liam Sullivan, and his dependent, to ensure no loose ends or unauthorized sharing of company secrets. Sullivan and the dependent are to be considered collateral damage. Eliminate the contractor by staging a gas leak at his primary residence on Saturday night. Liam stopped breathing. The blue light of the screen reflected off his pale, horrified face. They weren't just going to kill Genevieve. They were going to blow up his apartment, with him and Maya in sight dear. The flash drive beeped, signaling the download was complete. Liam snatched it from the terminal, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. He had walked into this building thinking he was playing a corporate spy game. He had just discovered he was marked for death. The climb back up the vertical ventilation shaft was agonizing. Liam's muscles screamed in protest, his fingers slipping on the condensation-slicked metal as he hauled himself upward. But the physical exertion was nothing compared to the blind panic tearing through his mind. Collateral damage. Eliminate the contractor. The words from Richard Montgomery's memo burned behind his eyes. He wasn't just fighting to help Genevieve reclaim her life anymore. He was fighting a ticking clock for his own survival, and more, terrifyingly, for Maya's. Bursting through the roof grate, Liam collapsed onto the tar paper, gasping for the freezing, rain-soaked air. He didn't have time to rest. He scrambled across the slippery roof, leaped back over the harrowing drop of the alleyway, and descended the fire escape like a man possessed. When Liam slipped back through the service doors of the private dining club and into their reserved room, he looked like a drowned rat. His black shirt clung to his chest, dripping rainwater onto the plush Persian rug. Genevieve took one look at his pale, horrified face and immediately spun her wheelchair away from the table. "You got it?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Liam didn't speak. He walked over, his boots squeaking on the hardwood, and placed the black flash drive onto the white linen tablecloth. Then, his hands shaking violently, he pulled out his phone. He had snapped a quick picture of the memo on the server screen before pulling the drive. He handed the phone to Genevieve. "It's not just the offshore ledgers." Liam choked out, running a wet hand through his hair. "Richard knows you're moving money. He doesn't know about the FBI, but he knows you're plotting something. Genevieve, look at the date on the addendum." Genevieve's eyes scanned the glowing screen of the phone. As she read the words, liquidated permanently, and severed brake lines, the little color remaining in her cheeks drained away entirely. But when she reached the bottom paragraph, the order to stage a gas leak at Liam's apartment on Saturday night, she let out a sharp, devastated gasp. "Oh my God," Genevieve whispered, pressing a hand over her mouth. Her blue eyes snapped up to meet his, filled with a horrific, profound guilt. "Liam, I am so sorry. I brought this to your door. I put Maya in their crosshairs." "Don't apologize. We don't have time," Liam said, his voice dropping into a harsh, commanding register. The panicked father was being overridden by the pragmatic survivalist. "Today is Thursday. They are planning to blow up my apartment in 48 hours. They think Maya and I will be there. We can't go back to my place, and you absolutely cannot get back into that town car with Richard's men. They are parked right outside," Genevieve said, her mind racing to catch up with the sudden escalation. "If I don't walk out those front doors in 10 minutes, they will come inside to look for me." Then we don't go out the front doors, Liam stated. He moved to the coat rack, grabbing his dry suit jacket and throwing it over his soaking wet shirt. Do you have cash? Untraceable money? Genevieve nodded, reaching into her designer clutch and pulling out a thick money clip of $100 bills she kept for emergencies. About 3,000. Perfect. Liam peered through the crack of the private dining room door. The main floor of the club was bustling with wealthy patrons and hurried waitstaff. We are going to cause a scene. You're going to fire me, loudly, make it look like the worst date in history. While everyone is looking at us, we slip out through the kitchen loading dock. Genevieve didn't hesitate. She shoved her phone and the flash drive into her purse. A cold, fierce determination hardened her features. The terrified hostage was gone. The ruthless CEO had returned, and this time, she was fighting for her life. She slammed her open palm against the heavy oak table, rattling the fine china. Let's go. Liam threw open the doors. Genevieve wheeled herself out into the main dining room, her voice projecting with a shocking, imperious volume that instantly silenced the surrounding tables. I have never been so insulted in my entire life, Genevieve shouted, glaring at Liam with terrifying authenticity. You are a pathetic, gold-digging fraud, Liam Sullivan. I am Genevieve Sinclair, and I will not be spoken to like some desperate charity case. Gasps echoed through the room. Diners turned, their forks hovering mid-air. Liam played his part perfectly, raising his hands in mock defense, his face flushed with feigned embarrassment. Genevieve, please keep your voice down, Liam pleaded loudly, backing toward the kitchen swinging doors. Do not tell me to keep my voice down, she shrieked, throwing her napkin aggressively onto the floor. Get out of my sight. I will have security throw you onto the street. The maître d' rushed forward, desperately trying to de-escalate the situation, blocking the view of the front entrance. In the chaos, Liam grabbed the handles of Genevieve's wheelchair. Instead of pushing her toward the front, he sharply pivoted, shoving the heavy kitchen doors open and rolling her rapidly into the chaotic, steaming underbelly of the restaurant. Hey, you can't be back here, a sous chef yelled, waving a pair of tongs. Liam ignored him, tossing a crumpled wad of $100 bills onto the prep counter as they blew past. Health inspector, clear the way, he shouted. They hit the back alley loading dock just as a delivery truck was idling, its driver smoking a cigarette under an awning. Liam didn't stop to negotiate. He shoved another $500 into the shocked driver's hand. We need this truck for 2 hours. Keep your mouth shut, and there's another $500 when we bring it back. Before the driver could process the bribe, Liam had engaged the hydraulic lift, raising Genevieve into the back of the cargo hold. He slammed the heavy metal doors shut, plunging her into darkness, before sprinting to the cab and throwing it into drive. They had successfully vanished, but Richard Montgomery's men would realize it in mere minutes, and the hunt would begin. The delivery truck rattled aggressively over the pothole-ridden streets of Boston, the heavy diesel engine masking the sound of Liam's hammering heart. He gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, his eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirror. Rain lashed against the windshield, smearing the neon lights of the city into long, bloody streaks. In the back cargo hold, Genevieve sat in absolute darkness, holding onto the internal straps to keep her wheelchair from tipping. Their destination was Boston General Hospital. Genevieve, are you okay back there? Liam shouted over his shoulder, peering through the small sliding glass window that separated the cab from the hold. I've had smooth rides in a blender, she called back, her voice tight but remarkably steady. Just get us to Maya. Liam pulled into the emergency overflow parking lot at the back of the hospital, bypassing the well-lit main entrance, where Richard's men would undoubtedly be watching if they had already tracked them. He killed the engine and rushed to the back, pulling the heavy roll-up door open. Genevieve blinked against the sudden flood of harsh parking lot lights. "What's the play?" she asked. "Richard knows Maya is my leverage, but he might not know she was admitted to the hospital. The memo just said my apartment," Liam explained quickly, helping her navigate down the manual ramp. "If he figures out we're missing, he'll check my place first. We have a tiny window to get her out before he checks the hospital logs." They moved swiftly through the sterile, echoing service corridors of Boston General, avoiding the main lobby entirely. When they reached the VIP pediatric wing, the silence was deafening. The nurse's station was briefly empty. Liam pushed open the heavy wooden door to Maya's suite. Maya was sitting up in bed, surrounded by an absolute fortress of pillows, illuminated by the soft glow of the television. When she saw Liam, her pale face lit up with a brilliant smile. "Daddy and Genevieve." Liam's chest tightened with a vicious surge of protective love. He rushed forward, wrapping his arms around her small and fragile frame. "Hey, sweetie, how are you breathing?" "Good," Maya said, looking confused as Liam immediately started unhooking her secondary monitor. "Daddy, what are you doing?" "We're going on an adventure," Liam said, forcing his voice to remain light and playful, despite the raw panic clawing at his throat. "We're playing a game of hide and seek, but we have to leave right now to win." Genevieve rolled forward, offering Maya a reassuring smile. "It's a very important game. Maya, are you ready to be an astronaut on a secret mission?" Maya's eyes widened with excitement. "Yes!" Within 3 minutes, Liam had wrapped Maya in a heavy blanket and carried her out of the room. They didn't have time to properly sign out. As they bypassed the nurse's station, a young orderly called out, "Sir, you can't take a patient." Genevieve whipped her wheelchair around, fixing the orderly with a glare so authoritative it practically froze the air. "The child is being transferred to a private facility by order of Genevieve Sinclair. Do not log this transfer for another 2 hours. If anyone asks, she is asleep in her room. Do you understand me?" The orderly, intimidated by the sheer force of her presence, nodded mutely. Back in the delivery truck, Liam secured Maya in the passenger seat and helped Genevieve into the back once more. He peeled out of the hospital parking lot, just as 2 sleek black SUVs pulled into the main entrance, their tires squealing on the wet pavement. Richard's men had found them. They were seconds too late. "Where are we going?" Genevieve shouted from the back. "We need a secure Wi-Fi connection to transmit the server data to the FBI Cybercrimes Division. If we don't upload that flash drive tonight, Richard will remotely wipe the servers the second he realizes we breached the off-site archive." "I know a place," Liam yelled back. He drove them 30 miles outside the city limits, deep into the affluent, heavily wooded suburbs of Weston. He turned down a private, unmarked dirt road that wound through thick pines, finally arriving at a massive, half-constructed concrete structure. It was an ultra-luxury doomsday bunker and residential estate that Liam's firm had been designing before Sinclair Dynamics liquidated his department. The project had been abandoned for months, completely off the grid, but the subterranean level still had active hardlines for construction management. Liam carried Maya, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder, down the concrete stairs into the cavernous, unfinished basement. He set her up on a pile of clean, moving blankets, far away from the damp chill of the entrance. Genevieve wheeled herself into the center of the room, plugging the flash drive into her sleek, silver laptop. Liam found the active Ethernet cord protruding from the unfinished drywall and handed it to her. "The connection is going to be slow," Genevieve warned, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she initiated the encrypted connection to the FBI portal. A progress bar appeared on the screen, crawling painfully to 2%. "It's going to take at least 30 minutes, she muttered, staring at the screen with intense dread. Liam stood beside her, watching the bar. The silence of the abandoned bunker was oppressive, broken only by the steady dripping of rainwater and the quiet, even breaths of his daughter sleeping in the corner. "We're safe here," Liam said, placing a reassuring hand on Genevieve's shoulder. "No one knows about this site." But Genevieve wasn't looking at the screen anymore. She was looking down at her wheelchair. Her hands were hovering over the control panel on the armrest. A tiny, blinking red light, completely invisible during the day, was pulsing softly under the edge of the joystick casing. The blood drained from Genevieve's face. She looked up at Liam, absolute terror in her eyes. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They didn't track the town car. They didn't track my phone. Richard put a GPS transmitter inside my chair." Above them, the crunch of heavy tires tearing up the gravel driveway echoed through the night, followed by the distinctive, metallic click of car doors slamming shut. They had been found. The heavy, rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath tactical boots echoed down the concrete stairwell, sending a paralyzing chill through the damp air of the bunker. Liam didn't freeze. The primal, protective instincts of a father overrode his terror, sharpening his focus into a deadly clarity. "Don't unplug the Ethernet!" Liam hissed, his voice a harsh whisper. He sprinted to the pile of moving blankets, gently lifting a sleeping Maya. He carried her to a reinforced windowless storage alcove originally designed as the bunker's panic room. He laid her down gently, kissed her forehead, and pulled the heavy steel door shut until only a tiny crack remained for air. "Liam, it's only at 40%, Genevieve whispered, frantically, her fingers hovering uselessly over the keyboard as the progress bar crawled. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the eerie, pale light of the laptop screen. "They are going to kill us before it reaches the FBI servers." "No, they aren't," Liam said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He moved to a stack of discarded construction materials and hoisted a thick, heavy length of solid steel rebar. He gripped it like a baseball bat. "I designed the structural layout of this bunker. Genevieve, they are walking into my house." 3 men in dark tactical gear descended the final steps into the cavernous basement. Their faces were obscured by black masks, but the lethal intent in their posture was unmistakable. The lead man raised a suppressed handgun, a high-powered flashlight mounted to the barrel, cutting through the darkness, sweeping across the unfinished concrete pillars. "Spread out," the leader barked. "Check the perimeter. The tracker shows she's directly ahead." Liam melted into the shadows behind a massive, load-bearing support column. He knew this basement intimately. He knew that the temporary construction lighting was wired to a massive industrial breaker panel just inches from his left hand. And he knew that the acoustics of the curved concrete ceiling amplified sound in specific, disorienting ways. He waited until the 2 flanking hitmen stepped directly under a suspended array of heavy steel ductwork. Liam threw the main breaker switch. Instantly, a bank of 4,000-watt industrial halogen work lights erupted into blinding brilliance. The sudden, agonizing flash of white light completely blinded the hitmen whose eyes had adjusted to the pitch black. At the exact same moment, Liam swung the heavy steel rebar with all his might, smashing it into a temporary support strut, holding up a pallet of cement bags on the mezzanine level above them. The strut buckled with a metallic screech. A literal ton of dry cement rained down, burying the two flanking men in a suffocating, blinding cloud of toxic gray dust and crushing weight. They went down hard, their weapons clattering uselessly across the floor. "Over there!" the leader roared, recovering from the blinding light. He fired twice. The suppressed shots made a terrifying thwip-thwip sound, chipping the concrete inches from Liam's head. Liam dove behind the pillar, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The leader moved with terrifying, trained precision, advancing on the glow of the laptop screen. Genevieve sat frozen in her wheelchair, her back pressed against the cold wall. The progress bar read 85%. "Ms. Sinclair," the hitman said coldly, aiming the muzzle of his weapon directly at her chest. "Mr. Montgomery sends his regards. Step away from the computer." "Go to hell," Genevieve spat, her chin raised in absolute, defiant fury. She didn't flinch. She didn't cower. She stared down the barrel of the gun with the unyielding strength of a woman who had finally stopped running. "Suit yourself," the man sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. Liam didn't think. He launched himself from the shadows, tackling the hitman around the waist with the sheer, unbridled momentum of a freight train. The gun fired wildly into the ceiling, showering them in sparks and plaster. The two men crashed violently onto the hard concrete. The hitman was heavily armed and highly trained, but Liam was fighting for his daughter's life. The man drove a vicious elbow into Liam's ribs, knocking the wind out of him, but Liam refused to let go. He scrambled, grabbing the heavy, cast-iron base of a construction lamp, and brought it down hard on the hitman's hand. The man howled, dropping the weapon. Liam didn't hesitate. He delivered a brutal, desperate punch to the man's jaw, knocking him completely unconscious against the floor. Silence descended on the bunker, heavy and absolute, broken only by Liam's ragged breathing. He staggered to his feet, clutching his bruised ribs, and looked at Genevieve. She was staring at the laptop screen. A bright green checkmark illuminated her face. "Upload complete. File received. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Cybercrimes Division." Genevieve let out a trembling, tearful breath. "It's done, Liam. It's over." Before Liam could speak, the distant, unmistakable wail of police sirens pierced the night, growing rapidly louder. The FBI system had automatically flagged the massive data dump containing evidence of a murder conspiracy, triggering an immediate trace on the IP address. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents were swarming the private road. Hours later, as the rising sun painted the Boston skyline in hues of pale pink and gold, Liam and Genevieve sat wrapped in shock blankets on the back bumper of an ambulance. Maya was fast asleep, safely cradled in Liam's arms. An FBI special agent approached them, tipping his hat. "Ms. Sinclair, we raided Richard Montgomery's penthouse 30 minutes ago. We found him packing a bag for a private flight to Zurich. He's in federal custody, along with the rest of his board members. You're safe." Genevieve looked at the agent, then turned her gaze to Liam. The heavy, invisible chains that had bound her for 3 years were finally shattered. She reached out, her fingers gently brushing against Liam's bruised cheek. "You saved my life, Liam," Genevieve whispered, her blue eyes shining with profound gratitude and something entirely new, hope. "We saved each other," Liam corrected softly, leaning his forehead against hers as Maya slept peacefully between them. The desperate, transactional arrangement that had brought them together was gone, burned away in the fire of their survival, leaving behind a bond that nothing could ever break. What a breathtaking, pulse-pounding conclusion to Liam and Genevieve's incredible journey. From a desperate blind date to a high-stakes battle against a corrupt billionaire empire, Their story proves that love and courage can conquer the darkest of secrets. If you were on the edge of your seat during that bunker showdown, smash that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with fellow drama lovers who need a thrilling story today. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our next heart-stopping, real-life drama series. Thank you for watching.